The Elves and the Shoemaker. Once upon a time, an old man and his wife lived in a small village. The old man used to make shoes for a living. They were kind and honest people who worked hard each day to make fine leather shoes. Although they once lived comfortable lives, they had recently become poor. Then came a day when the shoemaker only had enough money left to buy leather for one pair of shoes. The shoemaker desperately hoped to sell his last pair of shoes the next day so that he could buy dinner. He cut the leather into pieces and kept them on the workbench to finish making them in the morning. Early the next morning, the shoemaker got up to sew his last pair of shoes. When he got to his workbench, his eyes fell upon the most beautiful pair of shoes he had ever seen. He puzzled and said to his wife, "Honey, I don't remember making these shoes. Or am I getting too old?" Nevertheless, his wife placed the shoes on the window for sale. Later that day, a customer came by and liked the shoes so much that he paid double the price and bought them. The shoemaker smiled at his wife and said, "We now have enough money to buy leather for 2 pairs of shoes. In fact, we may even have some money left for dinner." That evening, just as before, the shoemaker cut leather for 2 pairs and left them on his bench. The next morning, again, the shoemaker found 2 beautifully crafted pairs of shoes on his workbench. In quick time, both the pairs were again sold for a hefty price. The shoemaker and his wife now had enough money to buy leather for 4 pairs of shoes and a scrumptious apple pie for supper. Next day, he was able to sell all 4 pairs by lunchtime. This went on night after night, and in no time, the shoemaker and his wife started living a comfortable life again. One evening, a few days before Christmas, the shoemaker had an idea, which he shared with his wife. Honey, honey, we should stay up late at night and try to discover who is helping us. The shoemaker's wife agreed, so they hid behind the curtain and stayed awake. As the clock struck midnight, the shoemaker and his wife saw 2 tiny elves enter the workshop in tattered clothes. In the blink of an eye, they scampered onto the workbench. They picked up the cut leather and began to sew it together. Before the sun had risen, they had finished sewing the shoes. They placed them carefully on the workbench and disappeared as quickly as they had come. The shoemaker's wife was worried about the elves. "I would like to make them some nice warm clothes," she said to her husband. "Perhaps you could make some tiny leather shoes also." He readily agreed, and both got to work. That evening, the shoemaker's wife placed the gifts on the bench and hid behind the curtain. At the stroke of midnight, the elves appeared. They were just about to begin their work when they noticed the gifts spread out for them. They put on their new clothes and shoes and admired each other. They sang and danced and disappeared into the night. The elves never came back again, but it did not matter. The shoemaker and his wife were no longer poor, and they lived happily together for the rest of their lives. Thank you.